Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to your mini lesson on poetic forms, forms in poetry. Whether this is a first viewing for you or just a reminder as you're starting a poetry unit in one of your other classes, feel free to come back anytime. If this is your first time for American literature, be sure that you attempt those Cornell notes as you go through. Very short lesson today, just a reminder of that poetic form as we go through. Be sure to reach out to your instructors if you have any questions, and let's get underway. All works of art have form, which is a particular organization of parts that make up a whole. Form or structure. In poetry, it refers to the way the words are arranged in lines, the way lines are arranged into stanzas, and the way the units of sound are organized in rhythm or rhyme. In general, poetic forms fall into two categories: conventional and organic. Let's compare those and their differences. Poems in conventional form follow certain fixed rules. For example, they have a limited number of lines, a specific and specified meter and rhyme scheme, and they have a definite structure. Such poems are also called fixed forms poems, and they include a wide variety of items called, for example, sonnets, ballads, epics, elegies, odes, villanelles, and blank verse. The great English poets before the 19th century, such as William Shakespeare and John Milton, used the conventional poetic forms, as did American poets. Now, the organic form of poetry, also known as irregular form, it was developed in the early 19th century. The English Romantic poets wanted more flexible verse forms to fit the new content of their poetry. Unlike the conventional form that provides an ideal pattern for poems to follow, the organic form takes its shape and pattern from the content of the poem itself. That is to say, the form of the poem grows naturally out of what the poem itself says. Now, one way to understand the difference between conventional and organic forms is to compare the poetry of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and Emily Dickinson. You see, Longfellow was somewhat conventional in most of his poems, as shown in the following stanza from A Psalm of Life. Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, for the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what that they seem. The first verse from A Psalm of Life by Longfellow. You can hear the regular beat of the poem even without scanning its meter. Number, slumbers, dream, seem. Stressed syllables alternate with unstressed syllables 4 times in each line. Stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed on each of those lines. The metrical pattern is called trochaic tetrameter. And if you need more help on those different forms, you can research those further. There's plenty of research and resources online. Now, the excerpted lines below have a regular meter. It's an AB rhyme scheme. And even in the dash in the second line counts as an unstressed syllable. Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream. We have that stressed to unstressed pattern. Longfellow's poems also have a predictable alternating rhyme scheme and punctuation, that AB. Now, let's look at something by Emily Dickinson. The first stanza of her poem, From Exultation is the Going. Exultation is the going of an inland soul to sea, past the houses, past the headlands, into deep eternity. You're going to notice that the meter of her poem is also trochaic tetrameter, but notice the missing beat at the end of the second and fourth lines. This rhythmical variation, combined with the first line running onto the second, in addition to the unaccented dashes and the simple rhyme scheme, give the poem a forward acceleration and even a breathless quality that fits perfectly with the speaker's feeling of joy and excitement. The elements lend itself to the poetic theme and the tone that she's hoping to convey. So we have an A-B, C-B rhyme scheme, a little bit different than Longfellow. And we have a different rhythmical variation here that makes it a little bit different from the previous poem. Now what about free verse? Free verse, also known as vers libre in its French name, is different from both conventional and organic forms of poetry. It lacks regular meter and rhyme, and the freedom of free verse extends only so far, however. So when we say it's a free verse and you're wide open, there's still structures there. It still uses rhythm, although not in a regular pattern of meter necessarily. And it also depends largely on other sound devices besides rhyme to achieve musical effects, such as various types of repetition. The great master of free verse in American poetry is Walt Whitman. And at a time when all this American poetry and most English poetry sounded like Longfellow and had that conventional form, Whitman created a new form of poetic song. Let's take a look at one of those. From I Hear America Singing, the first 3 lines. I hear America singing the varied carols I hear, those of mechanics, each one singing his, as it should be blithe and strong. The carpenter singing his as he measures his plank or beam. Although Whitman's poem lacks meter, it does have a recognizable cadence, provided by the repetition of singing in each of the lines. I hear America singing, each one singing, the carpenter singing, and the parallel phrasing of the lines themselves. Whitman also uses a related technique called anaphora, in which the same word or phrase is repeated at the beginning of 2 or more lines, like this. From Song of Myself, where he says, I guess it is itself a child, the produced babe of the vegetation. I guess it's a uniform hieroglyphic. Using that repetition and that same at the beginning to pull that in. And you'll see that in the I Hear America Singing as he repeats that phrase at the beginning of a few lines. Now, ironically, repetitive devices such as parallelism and anaphora, like free verse itself, were developed very long ago. You can find evidence of them in the 23rd Psalm, for instance. Whitman's resurrection of these ancient devices freed future poets from the conventions that had been layered onto poetic expression for so many centuries and threatened to drain the life out of the poetry. Whitman's revolutionary poems were first published in 1855, but it took most English language poets until the 20th century to catch up. As we end the unit in American Lit, the part of Unit 3 includes poetry by Whitman and some 20th century poets who followed his lead as well. Let's end with some strategies for reading poetry and understanding that poetic form. First, read each poem at least 3 times. First to get an overall sense of the meaning, and then to clarify or deepen the meaning, and finally to study the form. Be sure to read each poem aloud as well. When we turn in papers, I ask all the time that you read your paper aloud, because you're going to catch things that might not necessarily fit into your brainwave as you're just reading it. Number 2, for conventional and organic poems, scan for meter and identify the rhyme scheme. Not the rhyme scheme, the rhyme scheme. There are plenty of sources online where you can view and review some of those items. But that meter and that rhyme scheme are going to help you figure out those organic and conventional poems. Number 3, for free verse poems, identify devices of repetition and parallelism, because they're substituted for the patterns of meter and rhyme. They're going to be different, but what makes them have that song-like quality, that musical effect? Finally, you know what works best for you. So monitor your reading strategies and modify them when your understanding of those breaks down. Predict, visualize, connect, question, clarify, evaluate. Use those strategies that you've learned to help you understand the meaning of that poem as well. If you have questions, be sure to reach out to your instructors, ladies and gentlemen. Otherwise, have a great week and good luck with poetry. I hope you enjoy.